Yo, what's going on, YouTube? And welcome back to Goal Line Hockey. It's your boy Kevin Forte, and we are going through now the game twos of the first round of the Stanley Cup playoffs. Two games are complete through the entire National Hockey League for the first round, so we're going to go over the games. In game two, a couple of teams started to assert some dominance in their series, going up 2-0. And other series, the road team has to feel pretty good coming out, winning at least one of those first two games, and now they have home ice advantage for games 3 and 4. We'll go through that here today. So the first round we're going to start off with is in the Eastern Conference, the Carolina Hurricanes putting a little bit of a beating on the Boston Bruins. The real difference between games 1 and 2 was the Bruins got 2 goals in game 2 compared to their 1 goal in game 1. That was the only real difference. Carolina's very good structure under Rod Brind'Amour, I did not account for that. I saw Carolina as not really much of a threat in the playoffs, and I'm kind of eating crow for that. I think Carolina has really shown, at the very least through the first 2 games, that they have looked very solid. They played a really good game. And there were some concerns about this team with goaltending. Both Freddie Anderson and Antti Raanta out injured, and we'll get to that in this video. So let's get into this game. So Carolina came out flying. They were really the better team, really through the first 2 games, and they were dominant here in the first period. They got 2 goals at the end of the first 20 minutes. Jesper Fast got his first of this year's playoffs, and Sebastian Aho got on the board, and there's reasons for concern once you get him going. Those were both in the second half of the period. 2-0 Carolina after 1. Sebastian Aho, a power play goal in the first minute and a half of the second period. It's already 3-0 Carolina. Boston tried to get things going a little bit. They would make the game 3-1, but Nino Niederreiter would end up scoring 2 goals in this game to finish it out for Carolina. 2 goals for Bergeron, 2 goals each for Sebastian Aho and Nino Niederreiter. Niederreiter's been very good in the playoffs this year. He's already got 3 goals in the first 2 outings. Fyodor Kochekov has looked good. Kind of looking like how he did at the end of the regular season in that New York Metro road trip. He played good in New Jersey. He played well in New York with the Islanders. He actually played well. So shout out there to Kochekov. That's kind of the lingo I'm going with for his name. So let me know what you guys think down below. Is it Kochekov? I think it is. But he played really well. The struggles in between the pipes again for Linus Ullmark. He's given up 10 goals in these first 2 games. Now, to be fair, there are a couple empty netters in there, so he did only give up 8 goals. But again, 4 goals against average per game, that's not going to do you too well in the postseason. And Carolina has a pretty nice lead in this series. For Boston, really the key thing here for Boston is you got to find some momentum coming home, going back to TD Garden. I mean, they have not really looked great in these games. The good news, though, Patrice Bergeron has looked solid. But again, other than that, there is some concern. There's some defensive just breakdowns, some odd man rushes, not really what you want to see from Bruce Cassidy's team. So they need to fix those things. And like I said, for Carolina on the injury front, in the second period, David Pastrnak, kind of a questionable play there. Antti Raanta is coming back to his net from behind the net, and he gets blown over by Pasta. It looked like Pastrnak could have avoided him. I'm going to give the blame to Pastrnak on this one. But Antti Raanta is hurt. Didn't look good. We knew he was shaking coming into the playoffs, as his last game was on Long Island against the Islanders. He had a really solid game 1. Kochekov has to come in game 2 and plays well. So for the Carolina Hurricanes, there is some concern about this goaltending now. How long can Kochekov, who is now their 3rd goalie, how long can he kind of hold up this team? Again, longer term. But again, so far, he has looked good, and there is some promise there in between the pipes for the Hurricanes. It's going to be very interesting to see how this series looks in Game 3, because it's been all Carolina through the first 2 games. And shout out to the Carolina fans. They've been very loud and active in those first 2 games at PNC Arena. All right, so staying in the Eastern Conference, we're going a little bit north, though. We're going up to Toronto, the Toronto Maple Leafs, and the Tampa Bay Lightning, the marquee matchup in the first round so far this playoffs. And Tampa Bay starts off scoring. They looked really good. They scored 3 power play goals total in this game. Toronto scores another shorthanded goal, that one coming from Alexander Kerfoot. A really nice play by TJ Brody. He's taken a lot of heat in Toronto this year. He ended up being the first guy on that puck. Instead of going for the shot, he kind of does a weird pass around. And next thing you know, Alex Kerfoot's left wide open. A great shot, though, by Kerfoot. A one-timer past Vasi. The way this game has kind of gone, though, in both games, as Tampa Bay did win this game, and they kind of had a stranglehold on Toronto, a very back-and-forth game. A lot of odd-man rushes, like we saw on that shorthanded goal. But this game was not indicative of Tampa kind of taking the tide in this series. I think it falls in the hands of Toronto still. A very back-and-forth, high-scoring game. That's going to favor Toronto if this is how this is going to go the rest of this series. And the fact that Toronto does have that Game 7 in Toronto, that could end up being the difference in this series. So if Toronto is going to play this if Tampa's going to play this game with Toronto, they better be careful, because the Leafs can score a lot of goals, and they can score often and quickly and be very much of a threat. That is a concern here for the Tampa Bay Lightning. But again, we'll see how things go. Andrei Vasilevsky made some incredible saves, so make sure to watch him going into games 3 and 4. But he looked really solid. This series is tied at 1 going down to Tampa. Like I said, I think Tampa's got to feel pretty good about themselves. They were able to, snipe a victory on the road. So if they win the rest of their games at home, this series should end in 6 for Tampa. In the perfect world, of course, right? So we'll see how this kind of shifts when it goes down to the Sunshine State. Heading into the Central Division, a pretty big rivalry matchup here, and things have started to get ugly in this series. It's been a really good series so far. The Minnesota Wild get some revenge in Game 2 over the St. Louis Blues. Both these games have not really been, close games for the most part. St. Louis really was dominant in Game 1 early, and then Minnesota was dominant in Game 2 early. The Minnesota Wild scored 3 goals in that first period and kind of set the tone for this game. Minnesota had a really strong first period, like I mentioned. St. Louis's defense, Craig Berube, I'm sure was, ripping them a new one after this game. They just didn't really look that good. They were very soft in front of Ville Husso, in the house. A lot of goals from in that area. You can't really give all the credit, the hindrance on Ville Husso. The defense in front of him just really wasn't all that great. They were a little bit soft. I expect them to be very physical and aggressive on the Minnesota Wild in Game 3, especially after the whistle in front of the net. I think Craig Berube is going to harp on that very much when they head back to St. Louis. Joel Eriksson Ek had a hat trick until he didn't. Joel Eriksson Ek scored a goal. It ended up being completely offside. It was a blatant offside, but the fans had already thrown their hats on the ice. So Joel Eriksson Ek's hat trick got taken away. But a couple minutes later, Kirill Kaprizov, who also had 2 goals coming into the third period, gets the hat trick on the empty netter. 6-2 Minnesota. And there were a couple of hats left in the stadium, so Kirill Kaprizov did get a couple hats on the ice there. And guys, those hats are not cheap. They're like $30 now. So you could definitely tell the fans, shout out to the fans. The Minnesota fans get to go home happy. They played really well in this game, and the series is knotted up at 1 after 2 games. Marc-Andre Fleury had his redemption game. He looked much better in Game 2. The defense was a lot better in front of him, and they were actually able to score a couple goals on Ville Husso, which they were not able to do in Game 1. They were shut out at home in Game 1. So Minnesota kind of changing the tide. We'll see how things go in Game 3. For the St. Louis Blues, don't really take this as that big of a deal. Like I said, until you lose at home, there's no real reason for concern. Kind of like Tampa Bay. You're able to steal 1 at home. You win the rest of your home games, you're going to win this series in 6. So I don't think for St. Louis this is all that big of a deal. They were playing with house money coming here into Game 2. Jordan Kyrou got a goal. Tarasenko got on the board again. So, again, just a really solid game overall for the Minnesota Wild. But the Blues, like I said, nothing really to worry about just yet. Moving on to the final game of the night. A pretty interesting game between the Edmonton Oilers and the Los Angeles Kings. Jonathan Quick and Mike Smith did not look great in the first period. A lot of shots from far out. Darnell Nurse was just throwing them around. Andrei Kopitar was throwing them around. Smith almost gave up a goal early in the first period. Again, Darnell Nurse kind of bailed him out there. And it was kind of like, uh-oh, we might be in for a real interesting game tonight. So Smith did look shaky. Edmonton started getting things going on the power play. Edmonton was not really able to get things going on the power play like the Oilers were. LA took control in the second half of the first period. They definitely got a lot more shots off. And then we get into the second period, and early there's a penalty by the LA Kings, and that ended up being the difference maker really in this game. That really set the tempo as just under 2 minutes into the second period, Leon Draisaitl scores for his second goal of the postseason, a big power play goal for the Oilers, and that ended up being the game-winning goal early in the second period. Darnell Nurse ended up scoring his first of the postseason, a shorthanded goal. Ryan McLeod, who probably should have had a goal in Game 1, he gets his redemption. He gets a goal here in the second, and now it's 3-0 Oilers after 2, and there was really no positive look here for the Kings once that goal went in. Evander Kane, he got his first of the postseason. Jesse Puljujarvi got a goal as well, and Evander Kane got his second of the game, his second of the postseason on the power play. A couple power play goals, 2 power play goals for the Oilers tonight, and a shorthanded goal. I would say that's a pretty nice night for the Oilers. The fans were active and loud. Shout out to the Oilers fans. They are crazy. A big win for them at home to knot this thing up at 1, heading out to California. Quick didn't look great in this game. There were a couple of point-blank shots he probably should have had. But again, some defensive issues, and that's why I have the Oilers winning this series, is because there were some soft plays by the Kings where they were leaving guys like Draisaitl, at the top of the circle open, McDavid, more so in Game 1. They were too soft on the superstars on the Oilers, and that ended up biting them in the ass here in Game 2. Like I said, I've always given Edmonton so much shit for their lack of depth scoring. Not the case tonight. We saw the top guys getting goals like Draisaitl and Kane, but we also saw guys like Ryan McLeod and Jesse Puljujarvi get on the board. That is going to be critical for the Oilers in their playoff run this year, because they need to score goals from guys other than named Draisaitl and McDavid, and for all that matter, Evander Kane. So nice to see them getting that in this one. All right, so moving on to day 2 of the Game 2s, we moved on back to the Eastern Conference for the earlier matchups. The New York Rangers and the Pittsburgh Penguins, a pretty interesting Game 1. Casey DeSmith, the backup goalie, the second goalie in the Penguins depth chart, he goes down with injury. And that meant Louis Domingue would start Game 2 for the Pittsburgh Penguins. Matt Diorio, who has not started in the National Hockey League, was backing up Louis Domingue. So, he was probably thinking, I really hope things go well in this one. Early on, Louis Domingue actually looked good. He stopped Mika Zibanejad on a really nice play. That really could have opened things up early. Rangers could have gone up 2-0 after that. But Andrew Copp scores again. Andrew Copp has been really good for the Rangers. That's his second of the playoffs already. Whatever dollar amount he gets from the Rangers this offseason, if they decide to keep him, if he doesn't price himself out, he's going to get a big number. He's been really good for the Rangers here. Even in the playoffs, but even before that, at the end of the regular season, before his injury, he looked really good. Louis Domingue, after that Zibanejad save, though, looked shaky, especially in the second and third period. You could kind of see that take control. If the Rangers do get past the first round, and advice for the Penguins for the rest of this playoff series, don't take penalties. The Rangers were really good on the power play during the regular season, and that proved to bite them here in the postseason so far, as the Rangers get another power play goal from Ryan Strome That's his first of the postseason. Chris Kreider scored another goal, a tip-in goal, as you would expect. Artemi Panarin gets on the board. Frank Vatrano gets on the board. And just like that, the Rangers win this one 5-2. Timely saves by Igor in the second period. A couple of really good opportunities by the Penguins. My critique, though, for the Penguins in this series is taking bad penalties. That's been a problem for them for a while. And in game 2, it really came back to bite them. Michael Matheson, I hate to call out one guy on the Penguins, but I mean, in game 1, but in game 2 in particular, he's got to be a -3 at very least. Like, it seems like every goal that the Rangers had scored, Matheson was on the ice for. And you could tell after the 5th goal, he was actually a little frustrated. I don't know who he got involved with. I think it was Vatrano after he scored. He was kind of bumping him, and the Rangers were kind of getting him out of the way so they could, get the good old hugs after the goal. But Matheson looked awful, and that is going to be a problem. I think the Rangers were definitely looking for that matchup. I think Gerard Gallant saw, all right, number 5's on the ice. All right, Panarin and Zibanejad, get out there. That's kind of how it was seemingly going, especially in the third period. It was almost deliberate. And really the other thing is, and this is a discredit and also a credit to the top line of the Penguins, because the Penguins' top line is all of their offense so far. And, I mean, literally all of their offense. All the Penguins' goals have been from Jake Gensel, who now has 3 this postseason, Brian Rust, who scored, and Sidney Crosby. That's it. That's all the Penguins' goals so far in this series. We have not seen any goals from the bottom 6. Evgeny Malkin obviously got the game-winning goal in game 1, but other than that, nobody from lines 2, 3, and 4 on the Penguins has scored, other than Malkin. So there is reason for concern there. Yeah, we talk about the Oilers not getting depth scoring. Now the Penguins are getting a little heat for the rest of their lines other than the top line. So that was concerning. The Rangers just dictated play. Like, there was, I think as a Ranger fan, you were sitting here in this game, much different than game 1. There was some concern in the second period. It kind of sounded like, Pittsburgh was starting to take some momentum. But in this game, the Rangers just they just took control and really took control early and didn't really relinquish it. There was a little scare there when Crosby scored at the end of the second. You were thinking maybe they could turn the tide, but they couldn't get a depth goal from anybody, and that's where the Rangers' depth came in and said, yeah, we're going to come in and take this game. That Panarin goal, pretty much halfway into the third period to make it 4-2, that was kind of the nail in the coffin. Vatrano, just to follow that up, just to add some extra insurance, and the Rangers weren't giving up a 5-2 lead. Igor is too good, and that ended up being the difference in this one. So now heading to Pittsburgh, I guess, the Rangers, Pittsburgh was playing with house money. They were up 1-0 in this series. They go back to the Steel City for games 3 and 4. They got to get a healthy goalie. I don't know if it's going to be DeSmith or Jari, but they need somebody to come back because this is not going to work, because Domingue didn't look great. And do you really throw Diorio in there? Probably not. So, I don't know, kind of concerning there in between the pipes for Pittsburgh. Moving on to the next game, a pretty interesting game 1 in the Capitals-Panthers series. Washington kind of stole game 1. They looked really solid, and they were able to get a kind of a shocking victory on the road. They were down 2-1 in the third, ended up winning that 4-2. That wouldn't be the case in game 2. I think the Panthers learned their lesson. Florida, a huge night for the depth scoring. We saw Aaron Ekblad get a goal. Rookie Anton Lundell get on the board. Really good stuff there for the Florida Panthers depth. But obviously we saw the big guys score. We saw Barkov get on the board. Mason Marchment, as well as Carter Verhaeghe. Some big goals there for the Florida Panthers. They didn't really relinquish their lead. No goals in the third period. It was very much dictative of dump the puck in and kind of just try and just kind of wind the clock down, grind the clock to 0, and that's kind of what the Panthers did. I have to admit, though, Sergei Bobrovsky, especially in the first period, a lot of rebounds he was giving up. The Capitals were pretty on him in that regard. He was giving up a lot of rebounds, and the Panthers' defense in front of him was very soft. Both goalies, really, they kind of had to be spectacular tonight, and that's giving credit to Vanecek, because both the Capitals and Florida Panthers defenses were very soft in front of the net. A lot of rebounds that were, getting on net, second chances, guys that were just standing in front, loosey-goosey. Like, it just was very weird in that regard. I don't really know what was going on. And in terms of, teams scouting this series for whoever they have to play in the second round, whoever comes out of this series, I have to say both teams very soft in front of the net in this one. I think it was a little different than game one. But like I said, I mean, the goalies were pretty spectacular. When you actually look at how the game went, these goals, it easily could have been 10-5. With how these goalies played, they did really well. Washington had the stronger first period, and then Florida kind of took control in the second period. And that was really from the goals from Marchment and Lundell. And that kind of was how this thing went. But like I said, considering Florida had, I would argue the lesser first period, Ekblad and Barkov, it was still 2-0 Panthers after one, despite a good period for Washington. And then Florida kind of just took over, and that was kind of all she wrote after that. So that's the end of that series. At this point, Washington, like I said, played with house money. They won game one. They win games 3 and 4 at home. And you're looking pretty good going through the rest of that series. Again, easier said than done. But this series shifts back to Washington. And we'll kind of see how things play out the rest of the way. Series tied 1-1. All right, so now we're going back to the Western Conference. The Nashville Predators had a lot to prove in game 2. Losing 7-2 in the opener in Colorado. They did not play well at all. And we ended up seeing the young guy, Connor Ingram, get his first start in the National Hockey League in the Stanley Cup playoffs. And Ingram played great. He was really good in this one for the Nashville Predators. He did give up an early goal to Nathan MacKinnon. That's already his third of the playoffs. That is reason for concern. But he was good. And that was really a shining moment for the Predators, despite UC Saros and Rittich not being available. We know Rittich mentally might not have been there, probably a little bit of PTSD from game 1. And Ingram played well at the end of game 2, despite what happened. He played well here in game 2. We see a goal here from some depth scoring for the Predators, Yakov Trenin. No goals in the second or third, and Cale Makar got the goal in overtime. Just kind of a defensive breakdown in the Predators zone, and they win this game 2-1. They have a 2-0 lead in this series. This is the most lopsided series so far, but Nashville they looked much better in this one, and I think this is something that, if you're looking at it, I think there is room for improvement, but Connor Ingram, I think, has given some hope to the Predators in this series. If they can steal a game or two at home, again, you're asking for a lot here. If they can win one in Nashville, I think that's a good thing for them. Ideally, too. Darcy Kemper was the better goalie, though. Give credit to Kemper where it's due. But Nashville battled tonight and in this game, and I think they deserve a lot of credit for that. And maybe that's on John Hines, who I've given a lot of heat for. His team definitely bounced back quite well in game 2. So now the most probably boring series so far of this playoffs. Only 3 goals in this series so far. I think a lot of that's to the credit of their defenses and goaltending. The Calgary Flames and the Dallas Stars, we are knotted up at 1 at the end of this series in Calgary. Dallas beats the Flames 2-0 in Calgary. Kind of a reversal of game 1. The Calgary Flames were very defensively solid. Markstrom was a freaking brick wall in game 1. We saw the tide turn here in game 2. A goal by Joe Pavelski in the first period made it 1-0. That was the game-winning goal. And Michael Raffl, some depth scoring, the empty netter. And Jake Ottinger gets a shutout. He one-ups Jacob Markstrom. He said, you know what, you got a shutout in game 1, fine. I'm going to get the shutout in game 2. So each of these goalies have a shutout. And in terms of excitement level, for the fans that like to see a ton of goals like we've seen in pretty much every other series, this is the kind of series that maybe we aren't giving enough credit to, because honestly, whoever wins this series, I talk about Tampa and Toronto, in the Western Conference, these two teams, the video cut out there for a second, as we wrap things up here, this could be the series in the Western Conference that whoever wins this series might go to the Western Conference final. That's kind of what we're looking at here. They can dictate play, and Calgary was one up tonight. As dominant as they were in game one, Dallas said, all right, you're going to play that type of game, we're going to one up you. Give credit to Rick Bowness and Jake Ottinger and the rest of the Dallas Stars for playing a game that, honestly, they just really out Calgaried the Calgary Flames. So credit there to the Dallas Stars, and things are knotted up going back to American Airlines Center for game 3 and 4. So a pretty interesting start to the Stanley Cup playoffs. I have to say, the game of this series so far, the game of game 2s, honestly, I'm going to say that this has to go to this game. I'm going to give it here to the Dallas Stars and Calgary Flames. It was the most entertaining in terms of structure and overall hockey. Like, if you know the nitty-gritty in hockey, this was that game in the rounds of game 2. I think Calgary and Dallas are really, I've given Dallas a lot of heat for maybe kind of, just getting into the playoffs and just being better than Vegas, but Dallas is looking like a legitimate contender right now through the first 2 games against a really, really, really solid Calgary Flames team. So let me know what you guys think. What was the best game 2 of the Stanley Cup playoffs here in the first round? Let me know what you guys think. Guys, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you again next time.